From the very earliest age, autistic people are subject to various experiences of trauma. It arises when what they're trying to communicate is not truly recognised or understood, and as a result, their needs are repeatedly not met, and they're subject to judgment and criticism, or worse. I'm joined by Paul Micallef, autism coach and owner of the Autism from the Inside YouTube channel, to talk about why this is so common in autism and what autistic people and parents of autistic children can do to help mitigate or avoid it. So Paul, thank you very much for joining me. We're talking about trauma today, and there's a high correlation of PTSD and complex post-traumatic stress within the autism community. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's such a correlation there?
Well, one of the reasons is that if you have to take a look at a bit of a broader definition of trauma. So the way to understand it that I like the most is that a traumatic event is one that overwhelms your ability to cope in that situation. So to understand the trauma in the autistic population, we kind of have to get away from the stereotypical things we normally think of, right? We are not war veterans, typically, right? That's one of the things that we think of with trauma, but the more day-to-day stuff is more of what we experience. So if you think about something that overwhelms your ability to cope, that could be anxiety, it could be a sensory situation, it could be feeling unsafe for any reason. It could, all of those kind of day-to-day things are things that we are more likely than the rest of the population to experience.
Yeah, so whereas people think of trauma and post-traumatic stress as being related to one major event, like being in a war or having some really big traumatic experience, the difference with complex trauma, which is what you get in autism very often and in other areas as well, is that we're talking about smaller traumas but repeated over a long period of time. Do you want to say a little bit about what sorts of traumas they could be in terms of what an autistic person might go through?
I think it helps to use a personal example. So for me, for example, sometimes I feel like I need to get away from a situation. And it's not always obvious to the people around me how intense that need is to just leave right now. So if it might be because there's too much noise, it might be because I've just reached my limit in that situation, there's too much stress, there's too much social interaction, there's too much something. And I absolutely 100% life and death is what my body is telling me. I need to leave right now. And if for whatever reason I don't have a way of exiting that situation and going into a safe place, then that is inexplicably overwhelming, and it triggers all of my most primitive survival instincts that I am not safe, I have to do anything and everything at any cost to survive, which may result in externalized behavior, which we often see in children in the case of a meltdown, for example. Or it could be, in my personal case, I tend to internalize things, and that's not actually better, because instead of damaging things on the outside, I damage things on the inside by trying to hold everything in and trying not to act in a socially inappropriate way.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a very similar pattern to you as well in that. But what you're describing is what I think that a lot of autistic people go through, in that a certain thing is difficult for you, but it's the repeated experience. And I'm guessing here, I'm putting words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm right or not, of you putting out in your way, giving the signals, I need to get out of here. And that not being understood, that not connecting with what other people, what non-autistic people, them not getting the message because just there's a different communication style. And there's the repetition of that experience that leads to almost a dread before the experience happens, leading to almost an experience of having that experience without it actually happening because you're anticipating it. And that's what I think is the complex part of the trauma. Is that right?
That's right. The complex part that comes in is that if I'm in another situation that is even remotely similar to what's happened to me before, then my brain is going to send me those warning signs a lot earlier, saying, it looks like we're headed down that path again. We do not, under any circumstances, want to allow that to happen. What can we do to prevent that? Again, life or death at any cost. How do I get out of this? I just had a thought of another example that might not be very obvious. Very often, attention is something that we don't always control. So some people might be more shy, some people might be more extroverted. And when you receive attention that you don't want, that can be an uncomfortable experience. And so any uncomfortable experience can be taken to the extreme where the discomfort is no longer tolerable in that situation. And when that discomfort is no longer tolerable, I need to be able to have the agency to leave or to change the situation or to get out of that intolerable discomfort. And the key here is, if I do not feel like I have agency in the moment, then it is overwhelming and potentially traumatizing because it's something that's happening to me that I can't do anything about. And you can imagine that people have different tolerances
Yes.
for something like attention. So maybe being praised in front of the whole class might be a situation where, oh my God, everyone is looking at me. I don't want people to look at me. I want to go away, but the teacher doesn't let me sit down. And now I am in this situation where I feel like I can't escape from that situation. So it can really be almost anything.
Yeah.
And the list is very, very long when we start thinking about an intolerable situation of intolerable discomfort that I can't escape from.
Yeah, and it can be life altering, can't it? Because you go through that experience, and because it happens so often, you're in a constant state of anxiety and a constant state of sort of being below par. The interesting thing, I mean, you've explained why. I think you've explained why that's most common in autism. One, because people don't necessarily, non-autistic people don't necessarily understand how we communicate and what we're trying to signal with our communication, and also because the tolerance levels may be different for certain things. It's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of the symptoms of trauma, like this anxiety, like this being constantly below par, are often what are thought of as symptoms of autism. What would you say? I know you've talked about that in the past. What would you say about that?
Yeah, there is some overlap. There is a lot of overlap there. And one of the reasons for that is because when we think about autism, we generally think about an autistic person who is not coping.
Yeah.
And that's what we think of as autism. Autism is social anxiety. Autism is sensory challenges. Autism is meltdowns. Autism is struck rigid behavior and not wanting to change things. And a lot of the time that type of behavior is because the person is not coping,
Yeah.
and or the person is deliberately trying to stay safe. So rigid adherence to a routine, for example. Routines are safe. I know what I'm going to get and I know that I'm going to be okay. And if I go outside of that, well, I don't know. There's obviously more risk in deviating from my routine in that sense. So number one, a lot of what we call autistic behavior is just safety seeking behavior. And secondly, at a physiological and neurological level, when we don't feel safe, that's when our more primitive survival instincts kick in.
Yeah.
And they have one priority, which is keep us alive. They do not think about the other people around. It's not how can I be friendly? It's not how can I maintain relationships, or how can I talk to people or be social or be, pro social in any sense of the word. It's I am in danger. I need to look after myself. It's a very sort of narrow focused, self-centered survival thing. And that's a well documented neurological and physiological reaction that we are not predisposed to social connection under those situations.
Yeah.
So the opposite is also true. When are we predisposed to social connection? When we're feeling good, when we're feeling safe, when the environment around us feels safe to engage with. I can open myself up to the people around me because the people around me are safe and they're friendly and they're likely to respond in a positive way.
It's a really interesting alternative way of looking at it, isn't it? And I know that Professor Tony Attwood has also alluded to this, that what are commonly thought of as the signs of autism are not the signs of autism at all. They're the signs of anxiety. They're the signs of trauma. And it raises the question, doesn't it, that in a safe environment, in a world where autistic people weren't constantly misunderstood and weren't being sort of subjected to that trauma all the time, what would their life experience be, and what would their potential for fulfillment be?
Yeah, and there are some places where this is being explored and expressed. The more I got involved with other people in the autistic community, and seeing how people manage their lives and seeing how we like to socialize with each other, it's a completely different way of understanding autism when you interact with, number one, autistic adults, number two, reasonably healthy autistic adults who have coping strategies that work, that they can interact and function in society and with each other it's not in the neurotypical way, but it is in a way that makes sense and seems to work. So,
Yes.
so that I feel like that's an area we're really exploring still. It's fairly new to have groups of only autistic people coming together and figuring out what that means for themselves. So that's a really exciting development.
It is, and it's really interesting. And a lot of people watching this are parents of autistic children, and of course it's the best way to give any child a good future, the best potential future, is to sort of intervene as early as possible and give them the best sort of environment. What could you say to parents of autistic children of whatever age to help them create an environment around their autistic children where the child does feel safe and is protected from that trauma from an early age that is built on later?
So just quickly on what we were saying before,
Yeah.
one of the other things that can help significantly is having a role model and having just positive figures in your life to say that this is what autism is and this is what I can be one day. Because sometimes the reality of today, it might be a really, really difficult reality today. So having some kind of future to look forward to can make a really big difference. And in terms of preventing those traumatic incidences, there's probably one piece of advice that trumps everything, which is it's all about your own choice in the situation. If I choose to challenge myself and put myself in a situation, and I also have the option to leave when it gets too much, if it gets too much, then that can be a really healthy thing for me to grow and gain in confidence. If I'm being pushed into a situation and I don't want to be in that situation and I don't have the ability to leave when it becomes too much, then I'm probably going to start pushing back against that a lot earlier than is necessary. I use the analogy of a cliff face, right? And if I'm standing 5 meters from the cliff face, I probably feel fairly safe. If I was standing 5 meters from the cliff face and someone was trying to push me towards the edge, suddenly I would not feel safe at all at the moment, because this is the absolute limit. If I fall over that,
Yeah.
the outcome is catastrophic. So that is something to be avoided at all costs. And if someone's pushing me, then I don't want to get closer. I want to get further and further away. If I know that the adults in my life or the friends in my life or the other people in my life are supporting me to go as far as I want and not further, then I can get a little bit closer. I can challenge myself. I can feel the fear of this is something that's really scary and new and I haven't done before, and I don't know about this, and I can push myself through that to have that experience in a safe way, knowing that everyone around me is supporting me, number one, to challenge my fears of my own choice and to pull me back and keep me safe if I go too far. So it's the one thing to focus on is it needs to be a challenge by choice. And there's lots of research around behaviorism and desensitizing and things like that, and all of that comes from I'm choosing to do it rather than someone's forcing me
or expecting me to do it. Yeah. So then you get a chance.
Actually expecting. That's a really good one. Very often parents might think, well, I'm not forcing my child to do anything, but the social expectation is really strong.
Yeah. In a way, you can fight you can fight against somebody telling you to do something, but if there's a expectation there, it can be much more insipid and much louder in a way. But I think you're talking about getting to a point where you have the opportunity to work on your development in a way that many people just never get the space to be able to do. So I guess the question for parents is going to be, how do they identify what the particular triggers are in the case of each child? What signs might they see to help them understand what their child is triggered by?
The signs are usually often fairly obvious. The signs are not coping for whatever reason. The signs are anxiety, anything that is avoiding. So in a very, very simplistic sense, we're either attracted to something or repelled away from it. So if there's anything in my environment or in my schedule that I'm less likely to do or that I'm likely to avoid, well, that's a sign that there is something with that I don't want to do for a reason that we don't know yet. And there will be some things that I put a lot of effort into avoiding. Clearly, there's something going on there.
Okay, so parents will easily see when there's something wrong, but to understand what it is, they need to, I guess, pay attention to at what moments their child perhaps becomes triggered in some ways. Would that be right?
And I would recommend things like checklists and suggested things like, what if it's this? What if it's this? What if it's this? You don't want to eat your vegetables. Okay, well, that's not a very precise answer. Don't like vegetables. Well, what does that mean? Is it don't like broccoli but carrots are okay? Is it don't like mushy vegetables but crunchy vegetables are okay? Is it don't like hot vegetables but cold vegetables are okay? What is the specific thing that is going on? And the reason it helps to dive really deeply into finding the specific thing is because otherwise it just rules out most of life. I don't like going outside, so I just won't go outside. That's not okay. I
Yes.
need to figure out what it is about going outside that is triggering for me so that I can take that seriously and make sure that that doesn't happen. Like, what if I'm afraid of dogs, for example, and it comes out in a very immature way as I don't want to go outside. Until you figure out what the specific thing is, you can't deal with the problem. And just another thing on what you were saying before about expectations, the easy, one of the ways to get around unspoken expectations being a pushing force is to emphasize the message that don't you're not going to disappoint me. Nothing you can do can disappoint me, which means that you're free to try and you're free to fail and you're free to try or do or not do or succeed or not succeed. Whatever it is, it's your journey of challenging yourself. And I'm here to support you and in every way that I can. And you're not going to disappoint me. I don't have any hidden expectations that I'm not saying out loud. Otherwise, it's very easy to invent unspoken expectations for other people that may not even be there.
Yeah, no, I like that way, and it's like about giving the child the foundations of self-acceptance and self-esteem, isn't it? Which is often taken away from autistic children unintentionally by the expectations placed on them, and the judgments about how they are that they pick up on.
Yeah, we tend to realize from a fairly early age, in my case, it was about 3, that I just did not fit in to the expectations of most of the other kids around me. So that sends an unconscious internal message that there must be something wrong with me. Why? What's wrong with me that I can't do that? That
Yeah.
I can't meet those people's expectations?
And it's really powerful to have a counter to that from your parents, from the people that you trust. Finally, Paul, I know your work is, I think, mostly with autistic adults, many of whom will have gone through well, probably all of whom, because I don't think there's many who never have gone through some sort of trauma when they were young that stayed with them for their lives. What advice would you give to people who are older than children and who've, maybe missed that opportunity to be helped through their parents and their families and their caregivers when they're young, to overcome things when they're older and when it's a bit more entrenched?
So definitely look into trauma. It's a really helpful frame. Um, it's really the most important thing with trauma is to heal in a safe environment, which means don't just push yourself until you're in a dangerous place and then re-traumatize yourself because you're doing the same thing that hurt you in the first place. It's trained professionals. There are people that train specifically in trauma. There are therapies that are specifically designed to help with this. It's one of the things that that you don't. Let me try to get that again. It's one of the things that the general population know about, even if they don't understand your autism, they can still treat you in a trauma-informed way, which can be really helpful.
And what advice could you give to their partners, their friends, the people who want to support them but maybe don't know how?
Probably the same. Look up trauma. There's a lot of stuff on it. And don't push people to go into areas that they don't want to, because that is where we risk. So asking someone to talk about something they don't want to talk about, in the case of trauma, for example, may be too much in that situation. So if someone doesn't want to, then that has to be okay. If that's an example of trying to push someone into an area that they're not comfortable with.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's been really interesting. Before we finish, do you have any closing thoughts or shall we end here?
Um, no, I think that's probably a good point to end. I'm a big fan of my reading of trauma. The more I read it into it, the more powerful I feel the concept is. Trauma-informed care helps autistic people of all ages. So it's a great model to understand.